This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, everyone. This is Brian Gockel, Weather Service Office of Observations, welcoming you to the Satellite Book Club Seminar Series. Today we have presenter Mike Jamilkowski, sometimes goes by Jammer, those who know him. The title of his talk is GOES-R Socioeconomic Benefit Study, Phase 1, Benefits of Improved Hurricane Forecasts to the General Public. Facilitating today is Chad Gravel. We appreciate Chad willing to and available to facilitate. Chad's a steadfast, long-standing ally in our quest to infuse satellite data into the Weather Service. Before we begin, just a few reminders. You probably heard the note that the audio that the session is being recorded as usual. We'll have Q&A after the presentation, and encouraging all the attendees, especially those from the forecast offices, regions, and centers, to post your questions in the chat room, and they'll be fielded from there. As usual, we're looking for future presenters, and the training team, Brian Mata specifically, can help put training materials together that where you see any gaps in existing materials or future capabilities that are being fielded. Thanks as always to the TowerS team, GOES-R JPSS program, TowerS team here in the Office of OBS, and in particular to Kashad Bowman, who has helped kind of direct and orchestrate this for today, as well as the OCLO training. Just a few words about Mike's background before we pass the mic over to him. Mike is retired from the Air Force as a colonel, had a long career with the Air Force as a weather and space operations officer. 2002, he retired, and then he worked several years for Raytheon as the program office manager on the NPOESS, became NPP JPSS ground system programs. He holds a bachelor's and master's degree in meteorology, is an AMS Fellow, and a graduate of the Air Force Undergraduate Space Training School. Mike, welcome to the Satellite Book Club.
Well, thank you very much, Brian. I'm very honored to be introduced by you, and I'm very honored to be sponsored here on the Satellite Book Club. I'm a big fan. I listen almost every week for the last couple of years, and I appreciate what the team here does. Kashad Bowman and Lee Byerly, and and the other people. And I want to point out on the slide here that my team for this study is listed here. My colleague at Aerospace is Dave Lubar. Many of you may know him. He's a specialist in spectrum and engineering. And Dr. Jeff Lazo is a really quite well-published and renowned economist who works mostly environmental issues there. Slide. Slide. Okay, just a quick outline here. I'll talk a little bit about the background and approach of the study. I'll show you some information on the weather information value chain that we use in this study, some objectives. I will focus in on some hurricane forecast improvements that GOES-R has afforded the system. Tell you a little about how we selected hurricanes as our focus for this Pathfinder in this phase 1. Whoa. Can you go back one, please? Oh. And talk about the tailored value chain we developed, talk about the economist methods, and also how we got the hurricane benefit value calculations out of those methods, and some summary and conclusions. Slide. Okay, so background, as you know, these government programs that cost a lot really need a credible justification beyond just some unquantifiable and general statement of how it benefits the public. And in this study, we are attempting, and I think so far we've been somewhat successful to trying to identify National Weather Service products that use GOES-R data as an input and determine the monetary value of those improved information. And in phase 1, we're demonstrating that with hurricane information. So we're using a value chain approach, and we as a model for this, we used a study that was done for NOAA back in 2017 on the fleet, and used their value chain method to characterize the value chain and evaluate the potential economic benefits of the GOES-R. And as you can see in that bottom line, the value improved, we came up with a number of about $9.3 billion. Okay, next slide. So again, I already talked about the approach here, but I want to show you the value chain. This is just a general weather value chain in this graphic you see in the center of the slide. It goes from the left, from gathering the data or the weather, and coming all the way to the right to determining an economic value. And so in our study, we are characterizing this value chain from information at the left to value on the right. We're using the previous GOES-R series, NOP, as a counterfactual, which means something to compare what we found to. And specifically for GOES-R, we're using in the process interviews, topical research, and economic valuation. And I will talk about this willingness to pay principle here in a few slides. Next slide. So just a couple of examples of value chain, and I promise not to give you too much value chain, but it's really a basis of what we do. So we go from the data collection analysis, and there's a lot of steps in between, down to the societal economic value. And I was just showing a real world example here where GOES-R ABI data was used to put into an IDSS forecast to help the air traffic controllers at San Francisco manage a fog clearing situation, and they managed to save, they were able to calculate, they saved $150,000 a day for just this. Next slide. Again, this is pretty much the same example, but I just want to point out at the bottom that most of these value chain steps are pretty straightforward. You know the system, you know the kind of products you're putting in it, you know your users, but the things that you don't have are a way of determining the percentage contribution of any observing system, and in this case GOES-R, to a particular forecast and or warning product. And secondly, it's hard and it's not evident to assess and actually monetize the value of that contribution. Next slide. So our overall study objective is to perform this study of the GOES-R satellite system to determine public benefits and economic impacts on selected user sectors. In this first phase, which most of this presentation is on, we undertook a Pathfinder. We wanted to pick out something that was that would demonstrate, I'm talking about a product, our methods for quantifying and monetizing the public benefits of GOES-R improvements to hurricane forecasts. Next slide. So as you know, up in the upper right here, you know those improvements of GOES-R over NOP, 3 times more channels, 4 times better resolution, 5 times faster scans, has contributed to hurricane forecast improvements that you see listed there, improving tropical cyclone track and intensity, forecast better data quality, faster scan speeds, increased warning lead times. You can take the ABI and GLM data and actually use it as a weather-like capability if you're out away from weather radars over oceans. And it has contributed to reducing the cone of uncertainty that the National Weather Service we have talked about for years. Next slide.
Hi, Mike. I'm sorry to interrupt. The slides keep advancing on its own, so that's why it keeps doing that, but I'm watching it here.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm not doing anything here. My hands are in my back of my
yeah,
head.
yeah, okay.
Okay. So, so how do we select hurricane products here? Well, we went and we've been talking and collaborating a lot with NESDIS TPO, the Office of Technical Planning for Integration of Observations, who had conducted the NOCIA study, which is NOAA Observing Systems Integrated Analysis, and they developed a value tree. And out of the value tree, we picked one of the the mission service areas for the National Weather Service that you see on the right. And of course, in the top 5, there are hurricane and tropical storms. Now, I don't know if these are necessarily in any prioritize value, but we determined that hurricanes and tropical storms would be kind of low-hanging fruit. It might be a good area to look at that have high value for GOES-R contributions. Next slide. So my last thing on value chains here is we took, now the previous value chains I showed you were all horizontal, right? But we do these kind of vertically. In the NOAA fleet study on the left, that's the value chain they use. It's pretty much the same thing. You go from the data collection and analysis down to the societal value. And in the center chain, we developed that specifically for GOES-R hurricane information value in general. But the one that we use specifically in the forecast, we had to focus down on a few hurricane parameters or hurricane parameters. And so this is the chain we use. Now, next slide. In the next couple of slides, I want to go over the economist's methods here. And I know you're all meteorologists, and I am too, but I feel like I'm an economist because I've been dealing with Dr. Lazo for a couple of years here. It isn't because I stayed into Holiday Inn Express either, but so the first method is expert elicitation. Basically, we take the judgments of experts and we synthesize those together where there is uncertainty, as it says here, and where data is unattainable because of physical strengths or lack of resources. And in this study, we do have a lack of resources. Only 3 of us doing the study part-time, so it takes a while to get things done. But in applying this expert elicitation, we surveyed a group of National Weather hurricane forecasters. Maybe some of you are out there. I won't name them. They're just numbers here to assess the percent contribution of GOES-R data to several hurricane-related forecast parameters. Now, if you look in the table down below, in the left column there is what we wanted the forecasters to respond to, but basically it's on hurricane landfalls, how strong the winds were, and the prediction of hurricane landfall 48 hours in advance, and also storm surge. And we came up with a wide range of percentages there, and we averaged those out. Now you're going to say, well, it's only 9 data points there. And the experts, I should say economists will tell you that their method of expert elicitation works very well for a group of 8 to 12 because they are experts. They are focused on this subject. They're not like surveying the general public, which is they're not experts. Anyway, next slide.
Before we go on, I think this is worth pointing out because it'll be harder to go back on the discussion. Can you go back a slide, Kashad? So it's important for everyone to notice this, I think. So it says you feel potential improvement you feel could be attributed to information from GOES-R compared to information without GOES-R, okay? Forecasters can estimate when the hurricane will reach land. So I think the important thing is if there was no geostationary satellite, right? Like you have to take that away. You don't have the previous version. You just have polar twice a day and you have radar when it gets closer to land. That's all you have. And that's how people need to think about why that's so important. And I just want I think that's just important for people to think about because I feel like, well, if we didn't have GOES-R, we'd have the old series. That's not what was asked here, right? And I think it's important I just want people to appreciate that. And we can go on and we can discuss later, but I thought it was a good opportunity for me to just remind people of that, Michael.
Yeah, Chad, that's a good clarification. I'm afraid as I try to rush through this stuff in 20 minutes or less, that's something that would get lost. So I'm glad you pointed that out. Next slide, please. So the second method that we use is called benefits transfer. And I talked about this earlier, willingness to pay. There are very few economic methods to evaluate what the value of what we call a non-market commodity is. Weather forecast coming out of the government is a non-market commodity. There's no value in the marketplace, and it's not traded. And so we have to go through surveys of the public to see what they would pay for improved hurricane information in this case. And those parameters that I pointed out that we asked the expert weather forecasters on the previous slide were the ones that Dr. Lazo asked the public, and we found the same data in 2 other studies, and we used that data to come up with these values. And this is what you see on the column on the extreme right is what a household is willing to pay for improved hurricane forecast information for those parameters I pointed out. And you might say, well, how do you come up with that? Well, economists have methods of surveying people, and I'm not going to try to explain them here, but I will say that in Dr. Lazo's study, that they surveyed many dozens of people along the coastal areas of the U.S. that would be affected by hurricanes. And Molina and all did actually thousands. They surveyed thousands of people. And one thing we found was that our initial assumption that we would just look at coastal areas was wrong, because the hurricanes affect people all the way inland, as you can see in this U.S. Southeast graphic in the upper right, and to lesser and lesser extent as you get away. But the hurricanes come in the Gulf and they go north and then head east. They curve east and they affect a lot of people. Okay, we can go to the next slide. So I don't want to bore you with all these numbers here, but when you implement this, the third method, you apply what you got from the other studies, and you look at the time period. You see here in the table to your right here that the expected lifetime of GOES-R is 23 years, and we took these willingness to pay values and took an average of those, and we took the percent attributable from the forecast experts and took an average of those, and you see there's actually quite a large 90% confidence zone there. And we took into consideration populations, growth, household size, as you can see, and we use economic factors to bring it to present value with discount rates and income growth. Next slide, please. And so you take all these data and you put it through an algorithm like this, and I'm not going to go through that, but you can see it has all these factors in it that I mentioned, including the economic ones. You do it for each year, and then you come up with a present value aggregation of the benefits. And in this case, we got almost 9.3 billion. So last slide. Next. So we had $9.3 billion. Now I put an asterisk here in that because this calculation does not meet the OMB guidelines for requirements for regulatory programs. But we are an independent study, and our economist believes that the figures that OMB uses are somewhat outdated, and these can be debated, but this is what we came up with. And you can see that the greatest uncertainty comes from when you only have 9 respondents, like I said. So the confidence interval goes from just over 5 billion to 13 billion, but we take an average of that. But one of the bottom lines is here is that we predicted such an analysis, if we did that for all GOES-R contributed province, and there are hundreds of them, maybe thousands of them, that it would yield a significantly larger monetization value. And when you throw climate change in there, that could be a lot more. I mean, we're going to be very conservative with what we come up with. So phase 2 is the part of the study that we're in now, and we're looking for sources of benefits transfer. That means, are there existing studies out there that we can take those data and transfer them into our studies, like we did with the other ones for the hurricane stuff? And the other thing is, instead of doing expert elicitations, there is a database out there, the NOCEA database that I mentioned earlier, and they just spent the last couple of years doing a refresh using GOES-R on GOES-R of all the National Weather Service offices. And so that those data are there that we can use. And so we are out right now looking for the benefit transfer studies. And in the next month or two, we're going to come up with calculations, monetizations for a number of different areas. We're looking at aviation. We're looking at areas like flooding, air quality, severe thunderstorms. There's about a half a dozen areas we're going to look at and try to come up with monetary values for. Again, I would like to reference at the bottom of this slide, that's our published report for phase 1. And if anybody wants, I think I can probably provide a link to that to the Satellite Book Club if anybody's interested. So that's all I got. Next slide, and that's it. Questions?
Well, thank you, Michael. So there's a few, as facilitators, there's a few things I need to remind our attendees of. The first is we're going to have a discussion here with Michael. We hope that, we know some of you need to drop off at the bottom of the hour, but we hope that most of you can stay on and we can ask some questions. Feel free to throw those into the chat, as they come across your, your minds. The second is we have a couple weeks off, but in the new year, on January 6th at 12 Eastern time, Monica Bozeman, a physical scientist from the Office of Central Processing, will discuss AWIP satellite enhancements at national centers. If anybody has any suggestions on topics or ideas or speakers for Satellite Book Club, please see Lee Byerly or Kishad Bauman, for those ideas or improvements to the Satellite Book Club. And with that, I think we'll kind of start the discussion. It looks like there's some things in the chat. I think I'll start with myself, though. I mean, I am co-host. I should have some of that honor, right? I think what's interesting to me, there's a couple of things. First is, if we think about the GOES-R life cycle budget, and that's why I threw that in the chat, right? GOES-R costs $10.8 billion. A low in 10th percentile estimate from just hurricane would be half of that already back. And that's only one service area. My question is, and I can't remember if you talked about this or not, so I apologize, Michael. Do you plan on hitting all of these service areas? I know that there's a second phase, but are you going to do severe? Are you going to do aviation? And one of the biggest ones by far that it is the game changer, in my opinion, is monitoring the detection and evolution of wildfires in real time. Yesterday was a prime example. Oklahoma, Texas State Forestry Services, again, saying that GOES-R is saving lives in real time. Can you talk about that? What's next with respect to other areas?
Sure, Chad. Good question. I just lightly covered that, but I don't mind talking about it a little more, because in our phase 2, as I said, there are hundreds and maybe thousands of products that the GOES-R data contributes to. And because of our constraints on our study, we have probably just maybe 3 more months on this study. And so in phase 2, we've decided we're going to try to focus in on about 6 areas. And you mentioned them. I think we're actually in agreement. the ones we're looking at, and you mentioned some of these: aviation,
Okay.
aviation sport, wildfires, severe thunderstorms, flooding, winter storms, and there's probably some others, but I'd like to say a lot of people like you and myself are interested in what we can find on wildfire support, because there's so much of that going on now. And ever since GOZAR got up and operating, we found so many things that we can help improve that support. The problem is, are there any economists writing studies on that support, like being able to quantify what the value of the GOZAR alerting firefighters of a fire, how many minutes ahead or hours ahead? We're still looking for those kind of data. And if anybody finds such kind of data, let us know. I mean, you see my email address and my colleague's email address on there, but
Yeah.
the hard thing is going to be finding the data.
Yeah, and reach out to me too, because this is one of the areas that, while I've stepped away from a lot of my GOZAR work, that's one area where I really spent a lot of time, like I did most of the day yesterday, was helping the WFO forecasters detect these wildfires in real time. So there's things that we could potentially point you to. Now, if economists are working at that, unfortunately, I don't know that, but maybe we can try to put our minds together, because that would be an interesting thing to I'd love to see the study on this on wildfire.
Yeah, Chad, we would really appreciate your help there, because really in the end, we're trying to give Pam Sullivan, the GOZAR program director, ammunition for when she comes up for especially the next launch, GOES-T. She's going to go through a lot of press conferences, and she's going to get the inevitable question: what's the value of this stuff?
Right. Exactly. A question in chat from Mark DiMaria: how does the WTP relate to the way savings are actually accomplishments where are accomplished, which is where are large events like evacuating large populations or moving ships from Navy bases? You kind of see where Mark's going. Like, how are those cost savings improved, right? Because you gotta think that that's that's why that 5 billion seems like, even though it's a 10th percentile, I still think that's even it's really, really conservative.
Oh yes, we agree. And to answer
So
that, I can't.
Those aren't incorporated, right?
No, in these WTP studies, the public was just asked what the value of an improvement in the forecasts for a hurricane, like surge, the prediction of the surge or the landfall, all those kind of things. But there are other studies that we're looking for that have that kind of those kind of data in it, that show cost avoidance, for instance. I think what you might be talking about.
Sure.
And I know there are data out there, but it's hard to find. And by the way, we have amassed a big collection of literature that we have been looking through. We've used our aerospace librarian, and we've gone into different libraries, and it's you really got to search to find that kind of data if it's out there. We were lucky to find the Molina data. That was
like the example you gave at the beginning, from the Center Weather Service Unit in San Francisco, about the $150,000 a day, right? Like, you almost need those types of things, but I think that's why I kind of interrupted you halfway, is like, we have to remember, it's without GOZAR, if you can't do some of these things without the satellite, right? Like, you have to have a satellite taken away. Like, what I kind of tell forecasters as well: if you didn't have these pieces of model guidance, go make a forecast. Like, you can't use that. You can't use it then, right? Like it's just it allows them to
Right.
like almost appreciate, right? Appreciate that, I guess, is kind of what I was saying.
Yeah, hey Chad.
Right.
Yeah,
Can I
go ahead.
ask a follow-up?
Yeah, please.
Yeah, sorry, my chat message was so garbled.
No, it's okay. I hope I
tried.
kind of like saved it after.
Yeah, you did pretty well. And first, I was going to say that this analysis is just really hard. So
Yes.
I know you have to make a lot of assumptions. So it's really nice to see this being attempted. What I was getting at is there were some recent studies at the Hurricane Center for Hurricane Dorian, was 2019. It approached the coast, and because of the better track forecasts, the coastal evacuations were basically restricted, and basically about 2 million people didn't evacuate that would have probably 10 years ago. The Hurricane Center did a little study on that. Or there's been a couple of cases that show that Norfolk Navy base wasn't evacuated when it would have been before, and that cost tens of millions of dollars to evacuate a Navy base. So there are these big numbers that are out there that seem like that aren't really captured when you just have the ask the public for the value of an improved forecast. So I'm guessing that is a pretty gross underestimation.
Yeah, I agree completely.
Yeah. And Mark, we're looking for those. We're looking for those kind of data too. When I worked the NPOESS program at the program office for 8 years, and we struggled to find real money data to justify, NPOESS. One of the studies that we were alerted on was a study, I don't know, it was the National Weather Service that estimated that you could save $1 million for every mile that you avoided evacuation in a hurricane situation. But we never could find the source of that one. But that's the kind of thing I think you're talking about too.
Yeah, it's related to that, but it is so highly dependent on where the storm strikes. That came from a study, I think, back in the 60s or 70s. I've seen that number before, but I think as Steve's comment was that's not a good way to do it. It's good to look at individual cases or some statistical average.
Right. And if I may, Chad, I see Bill Schoberg's question about
that's where I was
previous
go
studies.
Next. Yeah, that's where have you done what Bill asked?
Yeah, and we have access to all those studies and look at it. The problem with those studies is they were looking ahead and guessing, and we're looking behind and using actual data. And so we're trying to meld those both methods together. And but we have looked at those, Bill. Next question.
I'm trying to scan through things. Steve Goodman said, you said something, he has a pretty long chat there, but at the end he said, you said something about old methods. Are there new acceptable methods that our sponsors prefer to accept? And I'm assuming Steve's referring to government officials and maybe some others.
Yeah, Steve, if you're referring to the OMB stuff, those data were come about in early 2000s, and that was just to guide us on discount rates. Basically, they recommended discount rates a lot higher than we use, because the lower the discount rate, the higher the value of the benefit. And our economists went through and did some analysis on the way the discount rates have trended since then, and we believe that those discount rates are a lot lower. Now, is that what you were talking about, Steve? I don't know if he's still on.
Yeah, he might have dropped off because we're at 36 after the hour. Kashad, could you go back to the slide that I originally stopped Michael on? I think it says we have a few minutes. I think, this is the one. These questions, right? I think they're interesting. and I guess, and I kind of keep going back to this because, I was interested, Lee and Kashad sometimes, it's usually when they can't get anyone else to co-host, they come to me. Sometimes I'm like, I'm available, sometimes I'm not, right? But usually I try to like pitch in at the last minute. But I felt this one was interesting to me, and I'm gonna because and I'm gonna tell you a quick story because we have a few minutes. Um, is that I end up getting into this like operational meteorologist rut. Okay. So when I think of like, okay, the impact to like hurricane forecast, I'm really thinking about, okay, how is the imagery using for the hurricane analyst to be making better decisions? Okay. One of the to me, and Mark, please correct me. And Mark, if you want to come back and like, add value to anything I'm saying, please do. One of the things to me is at sunrise, and a lot of times for those of you who don't know, the Hurricane Center, especially in weak systems, they'll call the 1 minute imagery to be centered over the system right at around sunrise to get the best almost like center point with the 1 minute data that they can. And to me that one always resonated with me. And the ones that don't, but they're sexy, is like these images like that Dan Lindsay, these loops that Dan Lindsay sends out. They're amazing. You can see like mesovortices inside the eye wall. It's amazing stuff. But to me, they don't add any value, right? Because it's, it's okay. We already know it's a Cat 5 because we have airplanes flying into it. Sure, that's really cool. But like, are you going to change anything based on seeing that? Probably not, right? So I always have a lot of hard time trying to figure out, okay, well, what is exactly really helping the Hurricane Center? But when I look at these questions, and the first one really resonated with me, and like I pointed out, you don't have any other geostationary satellite data to do these things. I think that's where I start to get a little more of appreciation, right? Because
Right.
I sent that 9.8 billion to somebody while we were on, and they were like, Rebecca, I can't wait to read the paper on that one, right? Like they almost like they're not believing it. But because I sent it out of context, but it's just it's a but it's a mindset that we just have to like I'm like right now I'm sharing the story because I'm trying to be vulnerable with y'all to understand how people can get into these like these grooves that they're really like I'm uneducated, right? So I thought this was like super interesting. And this slide, what to me is like the home run slide, right? Because it can kind of like really key in. Like you don't have any other tool. You don't have any other geostationary tool, right? And there's some things that you only can do, with the geostationary satellite, and that's why it's kind of huge. So I wanted to like just tell that story because we had a couple minutes. But Michael, do you have any comments on what I kind of shared? Do you guys kind of get that at all? Like, well, like Mark understands it's a low by far, like even 5 billion is low. But a lot of people, when I would show the average operational met that, they would be like, "Are you kidding me?" You know what I mean? Because I think they're not connected. Like, do you get that at all?
Yeah, yeah, and we think that these values, just like you do, are conservative. There
Oh,
are lots of
absolutely.
other factors in there, and and we've been trying to compare it to NOP, but sometimes we are just looking at the raw value when we use that willingness to pay method, just the raw value of what the public would think it would be worth to them, because you have to put some kind of value on it, and that's one of the few values methods available to economists right now. It's the best thing we have. I think the NOAA chief economist office would agree with us, and so. But yeah, I understand what you're saying. Without the GOES-R, what would we have? Without the
Well, and a
GOES
lot of
systems.
things, it's right. Like for the wildfires, there's no other tool. There isn't. Like you can, it's sure you get a polar pass, but that's not going to help you detect or monitor them. It's going to help you map wildfires, right? And you're going to know exactly where it is at that moment. But then you got to wait another, you get a couple in a row, okay, another hour for the next one in the train, right, and et cetera. But so there's just things you can't do without the geostationary satellite, and that's where you get the biggest thing, and they're very important. A couple more things in the chat before we kind of go. To show the improvements of GOES-R to the earlier generation of imagery, can the GOES-R data be reprocessed to remove the higher resolution data in limited channels and less temporal frequency of data for cases such as wildfires yesterday on the plains or in other cases? I think I can actually answer that. Like, so we've done that actually.
Yeah, I think you might have to answer that.
Yeah, so we did that years ago for operational meteorologists to show the improvements. While like I have slides on, I have a huge wildfire presentation, and I take a lot of time in it to really show the improvements, and I go through each part. I go through the spatial, the spectral, and the temporal, and I compare each one to the previous GOES to GOES-R satellite series. So I kind of do that. I do kind of show. I do that. So I can share that with you. Wildfire is easy to do too. And the other one that's interesting here is Scott Lindstrom said he's apologized for being late, and he just wants to talk. He wants you to maybe talk about like the other things, Michael. Maybe just, I know we've talked about it a few times, but like aviation guidance for volcanic eruptions and other things. Michael, I'll let you kind of chime in and like maybe go through the list again outside of hurricane forecast. What other like service sectors are you guys gonna look at?
Yeah, we're let's see. I'm going to go to the study here.
And I don't think there was a slide on it either.
Oh, okay. I'm going to my Google Docs here because I need to remind myself. We're going to look at wildfires. Like I said, it's wildfire notifications, detection and notifications type stuff. Aviation weather. We're looking at delays, commercial flight delays and diversions. We're looking at air quality. Pollution affects a lot of people. That's one of the things I want to point out in these studies. The things that are the highest value are the ones that affect the most people. And we're going to even look at the forecast to the general public and how GOES-R contributes to those, because even though it may be a small contribution, it affects most of the population. And so that could be a bigger number. We're also going to look at flood warnings and severe thunderstorms. And so that is my list. Is that what you wanted, Chad?
Yeah, that's perfect. I appreciate it. And I think we have time for one more. And I think it's a good one. Joe is asking, is there a way to come up with the economic societal value of all the community communication, like the public outreach value derived from ABI imagery in like Facebook posts or tweets? So basically social media stuff. Is there any way, have you guys thought or brainstormed on how you can take things from social media and maybe pull them into your economic analysis? I know that's probably kind of like even new for Jeff, but have you guys had any internal discussions about that?
Yeah, we have, and obviously, since this is a socioeconomic study, we are considering those social kind of effects to this. And again, it's tough to find studies like that, but I will reemphasize that Joe Zajic. I will reemphasize that to Dr. Lazo, that we need. Those are the kinds of things we need to consider, and I think he's open to that.
Yeah, great. Well, Michael, I appreciate the chat, and thanks for humoring me on on some of my questions and my comments in the discussion period. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Brian Gockel.
All right,
Hey,
Chad.
thanks, Chad. I like a good active moderator.
And Chad doesn't disappoint. Thank you, Chad, and thank you, Mike, for this presentation and this important body of work. I'll just say something briefly from the Office of Ob's viewpoint. Being a headquarters office, we're often asked, even as we're making relatively small investments, why are we doing this and what's the importance of this? And it long ago became insufficient to say, well, we're getting satellite data in front of forecasters. We need to be expressing it far beyond that in terms that the broader community can understand the economic value, and also that NESDIS and Weather Service are speaking from the same voice, from the same script. So especially when it's backed up by quantitative information like this. So can't underestimate, can't understate the importance of this work.
Yeah, Brian, before you go, I just want to thank you for saying that, because it allows. It's a, you know, an arena of accountability, right? We're trying to make each other accountable, you know, for the value of the data, and it's just not getting it into the forecaster. It's like, how can we be better? And that's something that I try to work with our operational Mets on every day. So I thank you for saying that. It really resonates with me.
Yeah. Thanks, Chad. And so we're pretty much past time now, so I think we'll wrap it up there. We look forward to joining you in about 3 weeks. As Chad said, Monica Bozeman's going to come talk to us about AWIPS at the National Centers. And since we're all going to have a holiday or two over the next couple of weeks, we'll end today's seminar, as well as this year's seminar series, with our thanks to you for joining, and a wish that you all have a well-deserved break at some point over the next few weeks. And we'll sign off there.